Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ICommunicate, aka MindsetGo radio show. Good to have you back on this Thursday afternoon. And today we're going to talk about outcomes and how those outcomes can be attached to mindset and the role your inner voice plays in not only success and failure, but how you perceive success and failure. And so I wanted to share a personal experience that I was thinking about yesterday, and I'm wondering how many of our audience members can relate to this. So when I think about a typical day, I often, when I do training for individuals and companies, I often ask them, when you lie your head down on that pillow at night, what is your self-assessment for whether it was a good day, a bad day, or a so-so day? And a lot of people really struggle to answer that question because there's so many opportunities over the course of the day for you to have experiences or interactions where you could perceive them as success and failure. So I'm going to go over, just share a typical day for me yesterday and how not only can those experiences impact success and failure, but the multitude of different experiences. So started out yesterday driving my son to school, my 12-year-old son who's in 6th grade. And what was interesting is there's been something I've been hoping, a very important matter I've been hoping he realizes the importance of for quite some time. And I was all ready to have a big talk with him about it, to try to pull it out of him. And I didn't need to. As I was driving him to school, he brought it up. And he said that he had come to a decision that he now recognizes the importance of taking a certain action. And it's a very courageous action he would need to take. But he realized on his own, and I have to tell you, as a parent, one of the things we have to hope for is that kids do things more intrinsically as opposed to extrinsically. And I think that for someone to, especially a child, to understand the motivation to do something on their own is a huge win. So day started great. Then I go into my office and I had a meeting with my business partner, and we had to discuss some issues that, nothing bad, but just had to move along some projects. Not necessarily my favorite part of my day, but we did. We were productive, had a good meeting. And then I had the opportunity to do a presentation for the MIAA. And for those of you who aren't familiar, that is the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association. And they are responsible for administering all the sports that go on in high schools and middle schools all over the state. And so it was my first chance to present to athletic directors. And for those of you who don't know me very well, I'm a huge sports fan. I coach youth sports in basketball and baseball. I'm a freelance sports writer for Associated Press. Play basketball, play softball, and I'm a huge Boston sports fan. So sports has always been a big part of my life. And so I went and did this 1-hour presentation on dealing with difficult personalities and talking about the different relationships athletic directors have with parents, with their coaches, referees, opponents, things like that. And the feedback I got at the end of the program was really positive, which I was very excited about because there's some programs I've developed I would really like to expand in the schools, not only across Massachusetts, but even nationally. And so as I was driving home from there, I was thinking, wow, a couple of things crossed my mind. You know, my day is off to such a great start. I've had 3 really positive things happen. And it also got me thinking on how much other people's feedback or non-feedback can really impact our confidence and how we perceive things as success and failure. So everything's going great. Then I go back to my office, more meetings, a frustrating meeting with things that should have taken a little longer than I thought. And it ended up being a little bit of a cluster, but, we got a project done. Met with my business partner on some pretty significant issues for the rest of the day. And then I was driving home last night and I realized, wow, I worked yesterday 12 or 13 hours, and I was all the good things that happened over the course of the day. And there were really no bad things. But I found myself on that drive home saying to myself, wow, I'm tired. This has been a long day. And I wasn't really recognizing the victories at that point. As a matter of fact, I didn't even really recognize the victories until I was driving to the radio show today. And it occurred to me that even when you have a day pretty much filled with all positives, does our mind default to negatives? And there's this expression we all use, I'm busy. And we all get caught up on our own choices, our own time and commitments and lifestyle. And the way those lifestyle choices can wear us down tend to really feed the mindset of, oh, this is tough, this is rough. I have a friend of mine who is always saying how difficult her life is. And I think to myself, boy, you work part-time, you're basically able to be involved in almost all of your kids' activities. You have the wonderful opportunity to impact your kids' lives, and maybe you don't make enough money or make as much money as you want, and maybe you don't have the ideal home situation, but at the end of the day, you have what so many parents would dream of. And that friend can't really digest that mindset. They can't really understand the benefit and the value of the one versus the other. And so this show today, talking about understanding how your mindset is affected by all that's going around you, the people, the experiences, your inner voice. And it all comes down to a word that overwhelms us, I think many of us, on a daily basis, and it's the F word. But in this case, the F word is failure. And when I think about failure, it's probably the one thing that most, if not all of us, fear and detest. Culturally, socially, professionally, no one wants to fail. And why not? Failure's humiliating, it can be frustrating, it can be demotivating, and in many cases it can be shocking because we're not expecting it. Especially if you thought you were going to succeed. And we see this often in sports because so many times we see heartbreaking losses. I've had the discussion with many professional coaches and athletes before about, would you rather lose by 1 or would you lose by 25? And I was one of these people for a long time who would rather lose by 25 because if you lost by 1, the thought that you were so close and you failed and you couldn't get it done was just so painful. And I really think it's an interesting thought process. But when you don't have a lot of experience with failure, then it can be very difficult to cope with failure and to move on from failure, and most importantly, to embrace failure and understand what you can learn from it. And I think one of the things that happens with people is when they perceive failure, they look at the outcome and say, well, I didn't win the game. And if I didn't win the game, or if I didn't do well in school, or if I didn't get great feedback on the review from my boss, then people take it personally and they do some self-reflection. And by the way, self-reflection's a great thing. I mean, as a matter of fact, self-reflection and using mindfulness is the key to growing and coping with failure. But understanding the process of what you expected in the first place and why you expected it is really important. And when we come back from our first break, we're going to talk about how failure can lead to success and how often it can really work for you. And hopefully, as you understand this, you can really digest the fact that the mindset around embracing failure, as opposed to the mindset of beating yourself up and telling yourself you can't do something, is totally counterproductive. So when we come back, I will talk about how failure can work for you. This is Mark Altman and ICommunicate. We'll be right back. Welcome back to ICommunicate, aka the MindsetGo radio show. We're talking today about how failure can work for you. And I want to start this segment by talking about positive self-talk. And my experience in working with a lot of my clients is people often scoff at positive self-talk. And if you're in your office today or driving, think about this for a second. Think about you just had a bad experience. You're a salesperson who just went on a sales call and no, you weren't at your best. You're a salesperson who just got a phone call that said they're not going to do a deal with you. You're an executive who just had a meeting with your staff because they're not as productive as they should be. And all of these things that could be so disappointing or frustrating or perceived as losses or failures over the course of the day, imagine going back to your desk and saying, you know what? I'm really good at what I do. And giving yourself for the next minute, trying to reflect on victories that you've had in the last day, week, even month or year. And it seems like you're almost manipulating yourself. It seems like you're almost trying to influence or trick yourself into being happy. And I think that's why a lot of people have trouble with this positive self-talk, because it doesn't sound authentic. It's almost like a game or an influence tactic. But what's interesting to me is those same people, when they use negative self-talk, think that's totally authentic. So when you beat yourself up and when you tell yourself all the reasons why you did fail and you start second-guessing yourself and you start questioning your skill level and your talent and your knowledge, that's okay. So the negative self-talk is okay. But for some reason, why isn't the positive self-talk okay? So I think that's an important aspect of understanding. The first step of this is getting failure to work for you, is understanding that positive self-talk and mindfulness is the starting point. Now, failure can lead to success, but it can also lead to failure. It really starts out with making a choice. Do you want to stay down and be beaten down, or do you want to stand up? Because here's the thing about failure. It's transforming, it's humbling, but it's also liberating and can be very enlightening. And one of the things I feel like I've used failure for over the course of my life is it's an antidote to complacency. I was talking to the coach of my son's basketball team, and he decided to play up a level in our basketball league. And he said, you know, I think the team needs to get some humble pie and needs to get, quote unquote, slapped down a little bit. And I was thinking, isn't that interesting? So there it is, failure, the antidote to complacency. If you win too much and if you're successful too much, do you maintain the same work ethic? Do you maintain the same attitude? I mean, we see this with salespeople all the time. You know, salespeople hit their quota, they exceed their quota, they get used to a certain lifestyle, they're making a certain amount of money, and then they say, well, you know what? I can kind of put it into cruise control. And the problem in that case is, what happens is they stop being open to new ideas. They stop being open to maybe working smarter, not harder. And they stop being open to constructive feedback. And what's interesting about this is about failure being the antidote to complacency. Whenever I give individuals or companies surveys or assessments, and they have to rank themselves and use emotional intelligence through a self-assessment, they have to rank themselves 1 through 5. And anytime I see people give themselves 5s, I just kind of shake my head, because 5 to me means you're an expert and there's nothing else more you can learn on that topic. And I just have never understood that. I don't know how anybody can give themselves a 5, because the second you think you're the best of the best, you lose opportunities for development and learning. Now, on the same token, or on the flip side, I should say, I often hear people say, you know, is this important to know? And then I hear people say, well, I mean, you can always learn. But I don't know if that's authentic all the time, because when people say, well, you can always learn, and that's why they like learning new things, that doesn't necessarily mean they have a mindset to learn. That means they're kind of towing the societal line of, yeah, we should always be learning. Look, failure is a stepping stone. It's required especially as an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur for the last close to 20 years, you know, you have to experience that agony and that frustration to be able to taste success. I look at my first company, Mark Altman and Associates. We work with government and utilities. And boy, I had so many ups and downs in that company. I mean, I worked out of my house. I had 3 employees working out of my house for the first 6 years I was in business. And then we eventually moved to a facility and acquired another company and ended up, being a multi-million-dollar company. But I'll never forget, for all the successes I had, I'll never forget that I was feeling so confident that I decided to expand my business and open up a branch in California. And this is something I pride myself on, due diligence. I mean, anybody that knows me will tell you I'm all about due diligence. If anything, I'm over the top with my due diligence, which, let's face it, listeners, that's an indication of my lack of trust, right? Which, again, in some ways has hurt me, in some ways has helped. However, this decision to open up a branch in California, I ended up losing $400,000 in 6 months. And as a result of that experience, my entire personality changed. Became very humble in business, became a lot more appreciative of what I had, took my process of due diligence and communication to a much different level. And all those changes that enormous failure created for me eventually allowed me to be on the Inc. 500, 5,000 for fastest growing privately held businesses in consecutive years as a result of that failure. And I never get there. If I didn't have that failure in California, I don't know if I would have had the drive or the mindset to make different decisions if I hadn't had that failure. And probably one of the biggest messages that I think goes with the word failure is it's temporary. The word failure is so powerful that it can seem permanent. And Carol Dweck, who's an authority on the growth mindset, who wrote a book on growth mindset, she talks a lot in her book about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And that's the difference between failure being permanent and failure being temporary. And my son came home from school and he was telling me about something they're learning in school right now called the power of yet. And again, this is one of those things you can be authentic and positive self-talk. So when people have a fixed mindset, they say, I'm just not good at fixing things. If they say, I'm not good at fixing things yet, that is what's considered a growth mindset. So the mindset of how you see things. So here's a few high-level differences between fixed mindset and growth mindset. When it comes to challenges, if something's going to feel difficult and it feels like you're going to, quote-unquote, fail at it or not be successful at it, you'll avoid it. If you have a growth mindset, you'll embrace it. When you encounter obstacles, the first sign of trouble, you give up easily. You're looking for excuses and opportunities not to see it through. If you have a growth mindset, you persist in the face of setbacks. When it comes to your effort, you have a template that your effort can often be fruitless or make it worse, as opposed to a growth mindset that says effort is the path to mastery. And when we talk about habit change and motivation, that right there can be a big deal breaker if you're going to succeed in changing a habit or be motivated. Do you see your effort as fruitless, or do you see your effort as a path to success? And this might be the biggest one of all, which is criticism. And so, do you avoid feedback? Are you the one asking people, how did I do? Not because you're insecure, but asking for feedback. Can I do anything better? How could I be more helpful? How did I do? That's really useful feedback. That's how you're going to get better. But if you're not asking, or if you're getting it and you're ignoring useful, constructive feedback, that is a fixed mindset. Someone who has a growth mindset learns from criticism. So think about this for a minute. You've got challenges, you've got obstacles, you've got effort, and you've got criticism. In all four of those elements, truly will shape your aspect of fixed and growth mindset. And when it comes to the success of others, if you feel threatened by the success of others, you have a fixed mindset. And if you find lessons and inspiration from how others behave and mentor and act and model behavior, that is the ultimate growth mindset. So when we come back from break, we'll continue to talk about how you can use failure as a tool to success and more about fixed and growth mindset. This is Mark Altman. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Mindset Go radio show. We're talking about failure as a tool for success, as well as growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I wanted to start with a story I once read. It's a really funny short story about really the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. So there was a research experiment where a marine biologist placed a shark into a holding tank. And what he did was he released several small fish into the tank. And as you expect, the shark swam around the tank, attacked, and ate all the fish, right? Makes sense. But then the marine biologist changed things up. He inserted a strong piece of fiberglass into the tank, partitioning the two sides of the tank. So now the shark did not have access to the fish on the other side. However, the shark continued to attack, and the shark slammed into the glass over and over and over and bounced off. Shark wasn't deterred. Shark kept repeating the behavior. No results. And meanwhile, the fish were thrilled. They swam around unharmed. And about an hour into the experiment, the shark finally gave up. And this experiment was repeated several dozen times. And the same thing happened over and over. And then, as a final step to the experiment, the marine biologist removed the divider. So no more partition between the shark and the fish. Guess what the shark did? Didn't attack. The shark gave up. The shark had full access to those little fish, but the shark was beaten down. It had tried over and over and over and was beaten down and gave up. And that, to me, is such a powerful story of fixed mindset and growth mindset. Because a lot of times what I hear from people is when they give up, they say, well, I've already tried that. It doesn't work. I've tried it lots of times. It doesn't work. And so when it comes to a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, if you believe you were unsuccessful in the past, if you have a fixed mindset, you're basically saying that I'm going to always be unsuccessful. And what we're not doing is we're not examining why we were unsuccessful in the past, just that we were unsuccessful in the past. And the danger here is once you build that life template that tells you you're not good at something, or you're not good interacting with people, or you're not good dealing with conflict, or you're not good being resilient when you're disappointed, once you start playing these messages in your head, you apply them to not only many other parts in your life, but you start to rationalize your behavior. So it's not, I failed at this many times, I'm going to fail at it again. I've made a lot of effort. It never gave me the results I wanted, so why put forth any effort? It's understanding, was there a particular situation that played out, or what were the steps in your process that led to this feeling you had? Now, when things don't work out according to your plan, there's three pretty big benefits, actually. And if we could use this mindfulness technique and start just thinking about these three things, okay, as a first step to embracing failure, it's an outstanding starting point. And here are the three steps. It's revelation, inspiration, and confirmation. So the revelation is, say you start losing, you're an entrepreneur. Say you start losing business to a competitor. Instead of reflecting on your efforts and reflecting on what you've done in the past to be successful, and seeing that as an obstacle that's standing in your way that's going to prevent you from getting what to do, why wouldn't you take a close and hard look at what the competitor is doing and what you can learn from? Are you doing some market research to understand what your competitors are doing differently than you in a written way, in a verbal way? Are you doing maybe customer focus groups to understand why you've reached, you're stagnating, your business is stagnating? Are you trying to understand the different steps along the way that you've done in your own sales process that could be, or even the marketing process that could be failing? Maybe you're not articulating your value enough. But the opportunity, when you hit those obstacles and those perceived failure points, to have revelations on what you could be doing differently is really, it's a great opportunity because it's also preventing you from being complacent. And one of the tricky things to me about this is whenever I talk to sales executives, and this is a pet peeve of mine, we talk about quotas and commissions and goals. The tricky thing is if I have a sales team and I have one person that exceeds their quota and one person that hits their quota and one person that's under quota, what does that mean? Well, we typically assume that if they're under quota, they're underperforming, and that if they're over quota, they're a star. But first of all, that is not a predictor of future success. It's only a predictor of present success. And if you're starting to think about future success is determined by your work ethic, your process, your behavior, your attitude, which is why one of the first questions I ask when I go to an organization that needs help in sales is I'll say, tell me who your top performer is. And if you were to clone that person, what are the qualities and characteristics and process you would clone? And so that's such a key to getting consistent performance, because quota, everybody can have a bad day, bad week, bad month, even bad year, I suppose. But quota is not necessarily on its own an indicator of talent or potential or future, certainly not future success. So we have revelation as a benefit to things not working out. Then you have inspiration. When one path is blocked, another path may open. It may not be what you thought you'd be focusing on. For instance, entrepreneurs, we know this as business people. Losing a piece of business can be devastating, especially if it's a large percentage of your revenue. You know, the 80-20 rule, right? So if you lose a client that represents 10% of the revenue, you could wallow in disappointment, see it as a big failure, or perhaps you could open up a dialogue with former clients. Maybe it gets you more energized and motivated to ask them for referrals. Go to your existing customers. See if they could help. Explore untapped markets. But again, you see the pattern here. Two directions. Inspiration. You have a bad thing happen. You lose a big client. Does it bring you down? Does it create a fixed mindset and interfere with those challenges that we talked about before? Or do you use it as inspiration to say, wait a minute, I didn't get here by accident. I was able to grow my business up until this point today because I have good people. I'm good at what we do. We have a good product. We have good service. And so this is an opportunity for inspiration. And lastly, confirmation. Failure can teach us what not to do. What worked in a previous experience or business. So I was fortunate enough with my first business to sell it and exit, and this is now my second business. But I learned so many lessons. And a lot of people came to me and said, wow, you're so fortunate. You were able to sell your first business and grow it to a large amount. And I say, as a matter of fact, I agree, because there's so many things I'm doing differently this time around that didn't work last time. And maybe I even overanalyze what worked and didn't work, and maybe I spend so much time on it. But once you receive confirmation of what doesn't work, what do you do with that information? Once you learn you did something and it doesn't work, how do you remember not to repeat that same mistake? Is it just etched? If it's really painful, like when I said losing $400,000, right, I'm never going to forget that. I don't have to go out of my way to remember that. But sometimes smaller mistakes, maybe an interaction you had with an employee where you knew you could have handled it better. And it wasn't the employee that was at fault. It wasn't that the employee was high maintenance or overreacting. It was that you knew that it was a communication technique or the way you approached giving feedback or receiving feedback that just wasn't the right way. And you know it. But how do you make sure you don't do it in the future? And one of the problems with confirmation is even when we get that confirmation, we know it didn't go wrong, but what effort do we make to not repeat that same mistake? And that's, again, where it comes to mindfulness. How do you make sure you don't make those same mistakes? And what kind of commitment do you have to not repeating mistakes? Because it's one thing to have failure work for you, but if you were smart enough to go through the revelation, inspiration, confirmation process, and you made those self-awarenesses and recognitions, and you're still not doing anything about them, then you really lose. We will be back for our final segment, talking about growth mindset and fixed mindset and how failure can work for you. This is Mark Altman for the MindsetGo Radio Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the MindsetGo Radio Show. I'm Mark Altman, founder and president of MindsetGo, and it's not a coincidence that my company is named MindsetGo. I really deep down believe that mindset is the number one predictor of personal and professional success and happiness. And your belief system really has the potential to sabotage your behavior. And I am amazed every time I go to a training and work with, whether it's a leadership team or a sales team or help companies on engagement or culture or service, how many times when I talk about inner voice and I look around the room and how many people can really relate to and resonate with how powerful your inner voice is. It's amazing. And so I mentioned Carol Dweck earlier in the show and her work with growth mindset. And, one of the big differences, I talked earlier in the show about the difference between fixed and growth mindset, but I want to reiterate another way to look at it is, do you believe in your basic abilities, your intelligence, and your talents? Or are they fixed traits? In other words, are you good at things or are you not good at things? So if you believe things like yourself where you say, you know what, I'm just not creative, I'm a procrastinator, I'm not a natural athlete, I'm not good with numbers, things that we all tell ourselves, messages that we all tell ourselves, what you're basically saying when you make those statements is that you don't believe you have the skills, the talents, and the knowledge. And the real problem and the real consequence to that fixed mindset is you're going to avoid those experiences. Because if you think trying something new, if you think trying to develop a skill feels overwhelming or you don't want to put yourself in a space of being judged or perceived poorly by your peers, or more importantly, perceived poorly by yourselves, you don't learn. You don't want to learn. And it's very hard to get better, personally or professionally. So what do you do about it, right? What can you do about this? How can you change the things you believe about yourself? How can you eliminate when you get into fixed mindset goals and actually achieve what you want to achieve? Well, I've talked before in past shows, a lot of it's the support system around you. But James Clear talks about identity-based habits and how important that the three levels of change that can occur come down to outcomes, processes, and identity. And he talks about the first level is changing your outcomes. And what he means is he's talking about instead of being concerned with changing your results, set goals. Set goals that allow you to achieve the outcomes you want to accomplish. So The outcomes are important. Don't get me wrong. He's saying that at this first level, you should be concerned about the outcomes, but you should be concerned about creating the goals that allow you to accomplish the outcomes. The second layer he talks about is changing your habits and systems, implementing a new routine, a process. So, for instance, let's say you want to lose weight, okay? And let's say you've actually uncovered the motivation to lose weight. What is your process that's going to allow you to be successful in losing weight? Let's say you're a salesperson who has acknowledged that you're struggling on the close. Do you actually take a step back, examine all the things you're doing along the way that pave the way for an effective close, and the things that you're doing actually effectively at close? And what's ironic about that is, to me, there is no closing stage. You should be, if you're a salesperson, you should always be closing, so it shouldn't be actually a quote-unquote step in the process. But to me, this is about habit change, and you can't change your habits unless you have a process. So in the world of customer service, for example, if every time a customer accuses you and makes it personal against you, you get angry or you get triggered or you get frustrated, and you know that about yourself, that's not going to fix automatically. You have to develop some coping mechanisms and some mindfulness around this, where when you start to think that and feel that way, maybe you have an index card at your desk that reminds you, oh, I'm supposed to do these 3 things in this moment, whether it's as simple as taking a deep breath, whether it's as simple as letting the customer vent and reminding yourself not to take it personally, whatever it is. Changing habits relies on a process. But the third layer, and the deepest layer to do this, is your belief system, your self-image, your judgment of self and others. And this is where the inner voice takes over. The beliefs, the assumptions, the biases that you hold about people around you and yourself. Outcomes are about what you get. Processes are about what you do to get there, but the identity is about what you believe. And when it comes to building habits and building a system or process, the problem is that one level is not better or worse than the other. All levels of change are useful in their own way. And what's kind of funny to me is, what are our goals when it comes to failure and success, when we're trying to change our habits, okay, when we're trying to improve our motivation, what kind of goals do we set for ourselves? And a lot of times when I ask people, if you're going to try a new communication template or technique or a strategy or a tool that I provide, assuming you believe it could work, then what is your mindset for results? So if you're a manager and you're giving reviews and you don't do a good job giving constructive criticism, and I give you a communication template to do that, and the next 8 times you do a review, I ask, how many times does that have to work for you to say, geez, I'm really glad I tried that process. I'm really glad that I took this opportunity to grow and develop and try to do something different and better. And I could have multitude of answers. I mean, anywhere from half or a quarter or 2/3 to 1. And they're guesses. I mean, it's really subjective. There's no one set rule. But I always look at it and I say, why does it have to be a number? You need to have a template to believe that this is the right way. So, for instance, when you're being assertive, if you follow the rules where you are mindful of your word choice, mindful of your tone, mindful of being an active listener, asking good questions, and using good body language, if you do that, you're good. You can't control other people's reactions. But this is the problem. Even when we think we do things right, the power of reactions and feedback from people around us can beat us down. So then, what you might perceive as a failure really wasn't a failure. It actually was a success. You executed what you wanted to do. You followed your process. You executed your system. But then, even if you get to that level, you look around and people don't give you the response or the results or meet your expectations, and now you're like, see, it doesn't work. But it did work. That's where the power of other people's reactions shouldn't impact whether it's the right way or the wrong way. But if you don't have that process, if you don't have that template to start with, you're totally setting yourself up for failure. There's no way, because nothing will be enough. So it's really critical that when you're developing your goals and your process and trying to work on your belief system and your self-image, it's really clear that you give yourself meaningful goals. Remember what I said earlier in the show. If it's okay for you to do negative self-talk, it's sure as heck okay to do positive self-talk. So thank you very much for joining us today for the MindsetGo ICommunicate radio show. We were talking about growth and fixed mindset along with failure as a tool to achieve success. For more information, please reach out to me, Mark Altman at maltman@mindsetgo.com. Until then, look forward to seeing you next week and have a wonderful afternoon.